What if half the history you learned was wrong? Napoleon wasn't short. He was average. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." Columbus didn't prove the earth was round. Cleopatra wasn't fully Egyptian. And Galileo never whispered, "And yet it moves." Newton's apple never struck his head. Nero didn't play the fiddle as Rome burned. And Cortés never set his ships ablaze. Tonight, let's unravel the myths that shaped our past. You're standing in the grand halls of Versailles now, where whispers of a tiny tyrant echo through marble corridors, yet the truth towers over these gilded lies. Picture this. History's most famous short ruler actually stood 5'7", perfectly average for his time. The confusion? French measurements versus English ones. While Napoleon measured 5 pieds du roi 2 pouces in French feet, British propaganda translated this as 5'2" in English measurements. For decades, cartoonists drew him as a diminutive figure, and the world believed. The soft shuffle of museum visitors, the gentle turning of history books, the quiet revelation that changes everything. Napoleon was neither short nor the monster depicted. He was simply a man whose enemies needed him small to make their victories seem larger. What other facts might be nothing more than translation errors wrapped in centuries of repetition? Hey friends, if you're enjoying these gentle revelations, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing historical truths. Now, you're in a silk-draped palace where a young Austrian princess faces the guillotine for words she never spoke. The phrase, "let them eat cake," appeared in Rousseau's writings when Marie was just 9 years old. Yet this fabricated quote became her death sentence, painting her as heartlessly out of touch. In reality, she donated generously to the poor and tried desperately to help France's starving masses. The gentle rustle of silk gowns, the soft clink of charity coins, the whispered prayers of a queen who cared more than history remembers. Political enemies needed a scapegoat, and lies travel faster than truth. How many other villains in history were simply convenient targets for someone else's agenda? You're aboard a creaking wooden ship where salt spray mingles with the myth that one explorer convinced the world of its roundness. Medieval scholars already knew Earth was spherical. Aristotle proved it centuries before Columbus was born. The real debate wasn't about Earth's shape, but its size. Columbus believed it was smaller than it actually was, making his westward journey to Asia seem feasible. The gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls, the soft unfurling of ancient maps, the quiet scratching of quills recording voyages. His miscalculation led to the accidental discovery of the Americas, yet textbooks still credit him with proving Earth's roundness. Sometimes our greatest achievements come from our most stubborn mistakes. What discoveries in your own life happened when you were completely wrong about something else? You're floating down the Nile now, where golden sunlight dances on water that has carried the truth about a legendary queen for over 2,000 years. History's most famous Egyptian ruler was actually Macedonian Greek, descended from Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt for 300 years without mixing with local populations. Cleopatra was likely the first in her line to even learn Egyptian. The soft whisper of papyrus scrolls, the gentle splash of oars in ancient waters, the melodic chant of scribes recording royal lineages. She spoke 9 languages, commanded vast fleets, and negotiated with Rome's greatest leaders. Yet Hollywood remembers only her beauty, not her brilliance. How often do we reduce remarkable people to their most superficial qualities? You're in a sun-drenched artist's studio where brushstrokes tell stories that contradict everything you thought you knew about struggling genius. The myth says Van Gogh sold only 1 painting in his lifetime, but art historians have documented several sales and exchanges. His brother Theo's wife provided this fact to romanticize Vincent's story after his death. The gentle scraping of palette knives, the soft whisper of brushes against canvas, the quiet satisfaction of completed works finding appreciative eyes. Vincent traded paintings for meals, art supplies, and medical care. He was poor, yes, but not the complete commercial failure legend suggests. What other artists' struggles have been exaggerated to make their eventual fame seem more dramatic? You're in a candlelit colonial room where quill meets parchment, and a brilliant inventor's joke becomes confused with patriotic preference. Franklin never seriously proposed the turkey over the eagle as America's national symbol. In a private letter to his daughter, he humorously criticized the eagle as having bad moral character while praising the turkey's courage. Somehow, this family joke transformed into historical fact. The gentle scratching of quills, the soft rustle of letter paper, the quiet chuckle of a father entertaining his daughter. Franklin was actually quite pleased with the eagle choice. He simply enjoyed wordplay and wit in his correspondence. How many private jokes have been mistaken for serious opinions in your own life? You're walking cobblestone streets where hoofbeats echo with a tale that mixed charity with scandal across centuries of retelling. The historical Lady Godiva did petition her husband to lower taxes on Coventry's residents, and he did reduce them significantly. However, the naked horseback ride was pure medieval fiction, added centuries later to spice up her story of compassion. The soft clip-clop of horse hooves, the gentle murmur of grateful townspeople, the quiet dignity of a woman using her influence for others' benefit. Medieval chroniclers loved dramatic flair, transforming a noble tax negotiation into scandalous legend. What acts of quiet kindness in your community might future generations remember as something completely different? You're in a Philadelphia sewing room where needle meets thread, and family pride weaves a story more beautiful than historical fact. The tale of Betsy Ross designing America's first flag emerged from her grandson's account nearly a century after the supposed event, with no contemporary documentation. While Ross was indeed a flag maker, the Stars and Stripes design likely evolved through congressional committee decisions. The gentle rhythm of sewing machines, the soft rustle of patriotic fabric, the quiet pride of craftsmanship serving a new nation. Sometimes family legends capture emotional truth better than historical records. Her contribution to American independence was real, just different. What family stories have grown more meaningful through loving retelling? You're galloping through moonlit colonial roads where hoofbeats carry whispers instead of shouts, and poetry makes legends from practical midnight rides. Revere never yelled, "The British are coming." Colonists still considered themselves British. His actual warning was, "The regulars are coming out," delivered quietly to avoid detection. Longfellow's 1861 poem created the dramatic version we remember. The soft thudding of horse hooves on dirt roads, the gentle creak of lanterns in church towers, the whispered urgency of secret revolutionary networks. Revere was actually captured before completing his mission. It was Samuel Prescott who reached Concord to warn the militia. How has poetry shaped what you believe about historical events? You're beneath an orchard tree where dappled sunlight filters through leaves, and the quiet rustle of branches holds secrets about how legends grow from simple observations. Newton himself never claimed an apple fell on his head. In later interviews, he mentioned seeing an apple fall while contemplating gravity, but Voltaire's 1727 account added the dramatic head-bonking detail, the gentle whisper of wind through apple branches, the soft thud of fruit meeting earth, the quiet aha moment of scientific breakthrough. Newton's actual inspiration came from years of mathematical work, not a single moment of fruity enlightenment. What simple moments in your life have been transformed by others' retelling into something more dramatic than they actually were? Hey friends, if you're loving these gentle revelations about history's beautiful lies, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that help you drift off to sleep while learning something fascinating. You're in a hushed Italian courtroom where shadows dance with candlelight, and the whispered words that made a legend were never actually spoken. Picture this. History's most famous act of scientific defiance never happened. After his trial for supporting heliocentrism, Galileo supposedly muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves, under his breath. But this dramatic phrase first appeared in a painting 127 years after his death. The gentle scratch of quills recording testimonies, the soft shuffle of robed inquisitors, the quiet dignity of a man who knew when to bend rather than break. Galileo was actually quite cooperative during his trial, strategically submitting to avoid execution. Sometimes wisdom means knowing when to whisper and when to stay silent. What battles in your life are worth fighting, and which require strategic patience? You're in a Virginia orchard, where morning dew clings to branches, and the sweet scent of blossoms mingles with tales too perfect to be true. The cherry tree story was invented by Mason Weems, a traveling preacher, in 1806 to teach children about honesty. No contemporary accounts mention this incident from Washington's childhood. The gentle buzz of bees among blossoms, the soft thud of an axe splitting firewood, the quiet lessons taught through invented parables. Weems wanted to create moral instruction, not historical record. His fabricated tale of young George confessing, "I cannot tell a lie," became more famous than many of Washington's actual achievements. What childhood lessons shaped you, regardless of whether the stories teaching them were literally true? You're in a workshop where amber light glows softly from countless experiments, and the gentle hum of innovation reveals that genius often builds upon others' forgotten work. Edison improved and commercialized the light bulb, but didn't invent it. At least 22 inventors created incandescent lights before him, including Joseph Swan, who demonstrated his version publicly a year earlier. The soft crackle of carbon filaments, the warm glow of experimental bulbs, the quiet satisfaction of incremental progress. Edison's true genius lay in creating the entire electrical system, power stations, wiring, sockets, that made light bulbs practical. Sometimes the person who makes something work gets credit for inventing it. What innovations in your world built quietly on someone else's forgotten foundation? You're beside the James River, where water reflects autumn leaves, and a young woman's real story whispers through the myths that Hollywood made famous. Her actual name was Amanute, with Pocahontas being a childhood nickname meaning playful one. She wasn't a princess. Her father was a powerful chief, but Powhatan society didn't have European-style royalty. The gentle lapping of river water, the soft rustle of corn leaves in tribal gardens, the quiet strength of a girl who bridged two worlds. She was about 10 when she met John Smith, making any romantic relationship impossible. The Disney version obscured a complex story of cultural collision, political maneuvering, and a young woman's remarkable adaptability. How often do our favorite stories simplify the beautiful complexity of real people's lives? You're in a Swiss classroom where chalk dust dances in afternoon sunlight, and the gentle scratch of equations reveals that even geniuses can be misunderstood by their own myths. Einstein never failed math as a child. This persistent myth arose from confusion about Swiss grading systems. He actually mastered differential and integral calculus before age 15. The soft whisper of turning textbook pages, the quiet confidence of a brilliant mind, the gentle persistence of curiosity overcoming conventional thinking. When confronted with this myth, Einstein himself said, "By the time I was 11, I had already mastered differential and integral calculus." Sometimes we create stories of struggle to make genius seem more attainable. What subjects that challenge you now might become your greatest strengths later? You're in the Globe Theater where afternoon light streams through open windows, and the rhythmic cadence of spoken verse reveals language living and breathing in its own time. Shakespeare wrote in early modern English, the contemporary language of his era. What sounds archaic to us was simply how educated people spoke in 1600. His audiences understood every pun, every wordplay, every colloquial reference immediately. The gentle murmur of groundlings, the soft rustle of silk costumes, the warm familiarity of language shared between performer and audience. We've preserved his words in amber, making them seem ancient and difficult, when they were once as natural as today's conversations. What aspects of your own time period might seem mysterious to people centuries from now? You're walking Venice's narrow canals where gondoliers sing softly, and the gentle splash of oars carries tales of spice routes and culinary confusion across centuries. Pasta existed in Italy long before Marco Polo's supposed journey to China. Ancient Romans ate a pasta-like dish called lagaine, and Arab traders likely brought noodle-making techniques to Italy in the 9th century. The soft bubbling of boiling water, the gentle rhythm of kneading dough, the quiet satisfaction of family meals shared for generations. Polo's writings never even mention pasta specifically. The connection was made by later storytellers who wanted to give Italy's favorite food an exotic origin story. What family traditions do you assume came from far away that might actually be surprisingly local? You're on a dusty field where afternoon shadows stretch long, and the soft crack of bat meeting ball echoes with the gentle persistence of American mythology. The Doubleday invented baseball story was created by a commission in 1907 to give America's pastime a suitably patriotic origin. Baseball actually evolved from various bat and ball games played by English colonists. The gentle thud of runners' feet on base paths, the soft leather pop of balls caught in gloves, the quiet camaraderie of teammates sharing summer afternoons. Doubleday was fighting in the Civil War during the time he supposedly invented the game. Sometimes nations need origin stories more than they need historical accuracy. What traditions in your community have grown more meaningful through the stories told about their beginnings? You're aboard a creaking ship where salt spray mingles with moonlight, and the gentle roll of waves carries the truth about a man caught between legal commission and legendary reputation. Kidd was authorized by the English government to hunt pirates, not to be one. When political winds shifted, his legal privateering became inconvenient, and he was sacrificed to public demands for pirate justice. The soft creak of ship timbers, the gentle snap of sails catching wind, the quiet desperation of a man watching his reputation transform into legend. His buried treasure, the stuff of countless stories, consisted of a few personal items he hid hoping to use as evidence of his innocence. How quickly can circumstances transform someone from hero to villain in the public mind? You're walking through an Ohio meadow where wild apple trees bloom softly, and the gentle buzz of bees tells a more complex story than children's books reveal. John Chapman planted apples primarily for cider production, alcohol, not fresh fruit. Most apple varieties don't grow true from seed, producing small, sour fruit perfect for fermenting but terrible for eating. The soft whisper of wind through apple branches, the gentle hum of frontier life, the quiet pragmatism of a man providing what communities actually needed. Chapman was a shrewd businessman who understood that alcohol was safer to drink than water and profitable to sell. What childhood heroes might have had more practical motivations than the stories suggest? You're in a Philadelphia parlor where afternoon light filters through lace curtains, and the gentle rhythm of needle and thread weaves stories more complex than patriotic legend suggests. The tale of Betsy Ross, creating America's first flag, emerged nearly a century later from her grandson's reminiscences, with no contemporary documentation. While Ross was indeed a skilled flag maker during the Revolution, the Stars and Stripes design likely evolved through congressional committees and multiple seamstresses. The soft whisper of fabric against wooden tables, the quiet satisfaction of precise stitching, the warm pride of craftsmanship serving a new nation. Her contribution to American independence was real and valuable, just different from the story we cherish. What family legends in your own history capture emotional truth better than literal fact? You're on the Palatine Hill, where marble columns catch moonlight, and the gentle crackle of distant torches illuminates a tale of political propaganda disguised as historical fact. Nero wasn't even in Rome when the Great Fire started in 64 AD. He was in Antium and rushed back to coordinate relief efforts. More importantly, fiddles wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. The soft shuffle of emergency workers, the quiet organization of refugee camps, the gentle efficiency of disaster response often ignored by dramatic retellings. Nero actually opened his own palace to house fire victims and organized rebuilding efforts. Political enemies later spread stories of his callous musicianship to damage his reputation. How often do we judge leaders by stories their opponents tell, rather than their actual responses to crisis? You're in a dim laboratory where radium glows with mysterious light, and the gentle hum of scientific discovery mingles with whispered prejudices that history has slowly corrected. Curie faced constant discrimination, not celebration, for being a female scientist. The Nobel Committee initially planned to honor only her husband Pierre until he insisted she be included. After his death, newspapers often reduced her achievements to her appearance rather than her groundbreaking research. The soft click of laboratory instruments, the gentle patience required for painstaking experiments, the quiet determination of genius refusing to be diminished. She remains the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences, physics and chemistry. What barriers are brilliant people in your community quietly overcoming that future generations might not even realize existed? You're in a 1920s animation studio where pencil shavings curl on wooden floors, and the gentle scratch of drawing tablets reveals that even beloved icons have forgotten co-creators. UB Iwerks actually designed and drew Mickey Mouse, while Disney provided the voice and business vision. Their partnership began in childhood, but Disney's name became synonymous with their collaborative creations. The soft rustle of animation papers, the quiet concentration of frame-by-frame artistry, the warm friendship between 2 dreamers building entertainment empires together. Iwerks animated almost all of early Mickey's cartoons single-handedly, though Disney received most public recognition. What partnerships in your life deserve more balanced credit than they typically receive? You're on a Mexican beach where waves lap gently against sand, and the soft whisper of ocean breeze carries tales of strategic leadership confused with dramatic mythology. Cortez didn't burn his ships to prevent retreat. He had them dismantled to use the materials for building and the crews for his expedition. This practical decision has been romanticized into a story about commitment and point-of-no-return leadership. The gentle sound of hammers on ship timbers, the soft splash of useful materials being transferred to shore, the quiet pragmatism of a leader making resources work efficiently. Sometimes the boring truth involves better planning than the exciting legend suggests. What practical decisions in your life have others transformed into more dramatic stories than they actually were? You're walking through colonial New York, where horse-drawn carriages clip-clop on cobblestones, and the gentle rustle of important documents reveals how birthplace myths can overshadow actual achievements. Hamilton was likely born on the island of Nevis, but claimed St. Croix to hide his illegitimate birth status, a significant social stigma that could have derailed his political career. The soft scratch of quills writing financial policies, the quiet brilliance of economic planning, the gentle determination of someone reinventing his own origin story. His actual birthplace mattered less than his extraordinary mind for financial systems that helped create American capitalism. How might your own life story be different if you could choose which details to emphasize or minimize? You're on a snowy mountain pass where wind whispers through ancient stones, and the gentle crunch of footsteps in snow carries tales of military genius embellished by Roman storytellers. Roman historians claimed Hannibal used vinegar to dissolve rocks blocking his path through the Alps, but this technique would be impractical and ineffective. The story likely arose from misunderstanding normal rock-splitting techniques using fire and water. The soft echo of thousands of soldiers moving through mountain passes, the quiet endurance required for one of history's greatest military maneuvers, the gentle persistence that turned tactical brilliance into legendary folklore. Hannibal's actual achievement, moving 90,000 men and elephants across the Alps, needed no embellishment. What real accomplishments in your life are impressive enough without adding dramatic flourishes? You're on the cobblestone streets of Coventry, where morning mist rises gently, and the soft clip-clop of horse hooves carries a tale of charity transformed into scandal across centuries. The historical Lady Godiva did successfully petition her husband to reduce taxes on Coventry's residents, and he did lower them significantly. However, the naked horseback ride was pure medieval invention, added centuries later to make her story more memorable. The gentle murmur of grateful townspeople, the quiet dignity of political negotiation, the soft satisfaction of using influence for others' benefit. Medieval chroniclers loved adding dramatic flair to noble deeds, turning practical politics into legendary spectacle. What acts of quiet kindness in your community might future storytellers remember as something completely different? You're in an ancient Greek bathhouse where warm water creates gentle steam, and the soft splash of displacement reveals how scientific breakthroughs become legendary moments through centuries of retelling. The Eureka story first appeared in Roman writings centuries after Archimedes' death, likely added for dramatic effect. While he did discover principles of buoyancy and displacement, the bathtub revelation was probably fictional embellishment. The gentle sound of water finding its level, the quiet satisfaction of mathematical understanding, the soft excitement of discovery that doesn't need dramatic proclamation. Real scientific insights often arrive through patient observation rather than sudden inspiration. What quiet moments of understanding in your own life might others remember as more dramatic than they actually felt? You're walking through an English woodland where dappled sunlight filters through ancient oaks, and the gentle rustle of leaves whispers tales of justice that migrated across counties and centuries. The earliest Robin Hood ballads placed him in Barnesdale Forest in Yorkshire, not Sherwood in Nottinghamshire. Later storytellers moved him south to create connections with more famous locations and nobles. The soft whisper of arrows through forest air, the quiet camaraderie of those challenging unfair authority, the gentle satisfaction of stories that evolved to serve each generation's needs. Robin Hood represents the enduring appeal of fighting injustice, regardless of which forest sheltered his legend. What heroes from your childhood might have traveled further from their original homes than you realized? Hey friends, if you're enjoying this gentle exploration of history's beautiful misconceptions, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that help you drift peacefully into sleep while learning something fascinating. You're in an elegant Viennese concert hall where candlelight flickers across gilded walls, and the gentle notes of forgotten symphonies whisper the truth about a friendship Hollywood transformed into deadly rivalry. Antonio Salieri was actually Mozart's friend and colleague, not his murderer. The poisoning story emerged from Pushkin's 1830 play and later became immortalized in the film Amadeus. In reality, Salieri taught Mozart's son after Wolfgang's death and spoke warmly of his colleague's genius. The soft rustle of sheet music, the gentle bow strokes across violin strings, the quiet camaraderie of composers sharing techniques and admiration. Salieri was a respected court composer who helped establish music education in Vienna. Sometimes our most enduring stories come from dramatists, not historians. What friendships in your life might others misunderstand as competition? You're walking through Renaissance Italian gardens where fountains babble softly, and the gentle fragrance of orange blossoms carries tales of a woman whose reputation was murdered by political enemies. Lucrezia Borgia never poisoned anyone. This myth was created by rival families to damage the Borgias' political power. She was actually known for her intelligence, patronage of arts, and charitable works. The soft whisper of silk gowns across marble floors, the gentle scratch of quills writing poetry, the quiet satisfaction of libraries filled with Renaissance learning. Lucrezia corresponded with scholars, supported artists, and governed Ferrara with wisdom after her third marriage. Her supposed ring with hidden poison compartment was pure fiction, invented by later novelists. How might your own reputation be different if your enemies wrote your biography? You're standing on a dusty frontier street where tumbleweeds roll gently past wooden buildings, and the soft jingle of spurs tells a more complex story than Western movies suggest. Earp was sometimes the criminal, not the hero. Before becoming a lawman, he was arrested for horse theft, running illegal gambling operations, and tax evasion. The heroic image came from early Hollywood and his own later embellishments. The gentle creak of saloon doors, the soft shuffle of cards across poker tables, the quiet desperation of men reinventing themselves on the frontier. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral lasted only 30 seconds and left Earp's reputation controversial, not legendary. Sometimes the line between lawman and outlaw was thinner than legend suggests. What second chances in your life allowed you to become someone better than your past mistakes? You're in a Philadelphia parlor where afternoon light filters through lace curtains, and the gentle rhythm of needle and thread weaves stories more complex than patriotic legend suggests. The tale of Betsy Ross creating America's first flag emerged nearly a century later from her grandson's reminiscences with no contemporary documentation. While Ross was indeed a skilled flag maker during the Revolution, the Stars and Stripes design likely evolved through congressional committees and multiple seamstresses. The soft whisper of fabric against wooden tables, the quiet satisfaction of precise stitching, the warm pride of craftsmanship serving a new nation. Her contribution to American independence was real and valuable, just different from the story we cherish. What family legends in your own history capture emotional truth better than literal fact? You're aboard a creaking ship where ocean spray mists gently over weathered wood, and the soft snap of sails reveals that history's most feared pirate was actually quite calculating about his fearsome image. Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, carefully cultivated his terrifying appearance but rarely killed prisoners unnecessarily. He wove hemp into his beard and lit slow matches around his face to create smoke and fear. The gentle lap of waves against ship hulls, the soft rustle of treasure maps, the quiet efficiency of organized maritime robbery. Blackbeard preferred psychological warfare to actual violence. It was more profitable when victims surrendered without fighting. His reign of terror lasted only 2 years before his death in 1718. What aspects of your public image are carefully constructed rather than naturally occurring? You're in a Swiss alpine meadow where cowbells chime softly in the distance, and the gentle whisper of wind through mountain passes carries tales of freedom fighters who may never have existed. The story of William Tell shooting an apple off his son's head was likely borrowed from Norse sagas and applied to Swiss independence movements centuries later. No contemporary records mention Tell, and the tale appears in multiple cultures with different heroes. The soft twang of bowstrings, the quiet confidence required for impossible shots, the gentle pride of communities creating symbols for their struggles. Tell became a powerful symbol of resistance against tyranny, regardless of his historical existence. What stories do communities need to tell about themselves, independent of their literal truth? You're sitting beside a misty lake where morning fog drifts gently across still water, and the soft splash of oars carries legends that crossed cultures and centuries before reaching medieval England. Arthur's stories originated from Welsh and Celtic traditions, not Anglo-Saxon England. The once and future king was actually a composite figure drawing from multiple Welsh heroes and Romano-British leaders. The gentle rustle of ancient manuscripts, the soft chanting of bardic traditions, the quiet transformation of local heroes into universal symbols. Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century writings created the Arthur we know today, combining fragments of oral tradition with medieval political needs. What local heroes from your community might become legendary figures in future centuries? You're in a frontier saloon where piano music drifts softly through cigarette smoke, and the gentle clink of whiskey glasses mingles with tales that grew taller with each telling. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, was indeed a frontierswoman, but most of her famous adventures were self-created publicity. She claimed to be an Army scout, Pony Express rider, and Wild Bill Hickok's lover, all either false or greatly exaggerated. The soft thud of horse hooves on dusty trails, the gentle rustle of leather chaps, the quiet satisfaction of surviving in harsh frontier conditions. She did work various jobs on the frontier, but her autobiography was largely fiction, designed to sell her story to Eastern audiences. What stories about yourself have you embellished to make your life seem more interesting? You're standing beside railroad tracks where steel rails gleam in afternoon sunlight, and the gentle rhythm of hammers on metal echoes with tales of workers whose struggles became folklore. John Henry was likely based on multiple railroad workers, not one specific person. The story of racing a steam drill appeared in various forms across the American South, each version featuring a different hero. The soft ringing of steel hammers, the quiet determination of men building America's infrastructure, the gentle pride of communities honoring their working heroes. The legend captured the anxiety of industrial automation replacing human labor, a concern as relevant today as it was in the 1870s. What modern workplace struggles might become legends for future generations? You're on a Revolutionary War battlefield where cannon smoke drifts gently across summer fields, and the soft splash of water from wooden buckets tells stories of courage that belong to many, not one. Molly Pitcher was a composite figure representing multiple women who carried water to soldiers during the Revolution. Mary Ludwig Hayes and Margaret Corbin both served this role, but the single heroic figure was created later for patriotic inspiration. The gentle slosh of water in heavy buckets, the soft rustle of long skirts navigating battlefield debris, the quiet bravery of women supporting the war effort in dangerous conditions. These women's individual stories were real, just combined into one legendary figure. What collective efforts in your community might future historians remember as the work of a single hero? You're in a dimly lit Parisian cafe where cigarette smoke curls gently through amber light, and the soft rustle of silk scarves whispers the truth about a dancer who became history's most famous scapegoat. Margareta Gertruida Zell, known as Mata Hari, was likely innocent of espionage charges that led to her execution in 1917. French authorities needed someone to blame for military failures during World War I, and this exotic dancer made a convenient target. The gentle click of champagne glasses, the soft whisper of evening gowns across marble floors, the quiet desperation of a woman caught between warring nations. She accepted gifts from officers of various nationalities, common practice for courtesans, but there's no evidence she passed military secrets. Her trial was conducted in secret with no solid proof of guilt. Sometimes societies need villains more than they need justice. What scapegoats in your community might be bearing blame for problems they didn't create? You're standing on muddy riverbanks where willows trail gently in slow-moving water, and the soft splash of paddle wheels carries tales of discovery that ignore thousands of years of native presence. Indigenous peoples had lived along and navigated the Mississippi for millennia before De Soto's 1541 encounter. Calling it a discovery erases the complex civilizations that had mapped, named, and used this river system for countless generations. The gentle lap of water against canoe hulls, the soft murmur of trading languages along ancient waterways, the quiet wisdom of navigation passed through generations. De Soto was simply the first European to document seeing it, not the first human to understand its importance. The word discovery often means first time Europeans noticed something. What discoveries in your area might actually be rediscoveries of knowledge that was already there? You're on a wind-swept Nordic shore where salt spray mixes with morning mist, and the gentle creak of longboat timbers tells stories of exploration that may have happened earlier than the sagas suggest. While Ericsson's voyage around 1000 AD is well documented in Icelandic sagas, some evidence suggests other Vikings might have reached North America first. His father Eric the Red had connections to earlier expeditions, and Bjarni Herjolfsson reportedly sighted unknown lands before Leif's journey. the soft snap of woolen sails, the gentle rhythm of oars through Arctic waters, the quiet courage required for sailing into unknown horizons. Ericsson may have been following routes already known to other Norse explorers. Sometimes the person who gets credit is simply the one whose story survived best in oral tradition. What achievements in your family history might belong to earlier generations whose stories weren't preserved? You're walking mountain trails where pine needles cushion footsteps softly, and the gentle rustle of wilderness carries truths about a teenage mother whose role was romanticized by later historians. Sacagawea served as an interpreter and cultural mediator for Lewis and Clark, but she wasn't their primary guide. The expedition had French-Canadian guides and detailed maps from fur traders. Her main contributions were diplomatic, helping negotiate with Shoshone tribes and signaling peaceful intentions. The soft whisper of wind through mountain passes, the gentle babble of streams over stone, the quiet strength of a young woman carrying her infant across an entire continent. At 16, with a baby on her back, she helped two cultures communicate during a pivotal moment in American expansion. What supporting roles in major events might be more important than the starring roles we usually remember? You're in a colonial Philadelphia workshop, where afternoon sunlight streams through small windows, and the gentle rhythm of needle through fabric weaves stories more complex than patriotic mythology suggests. The Betsy Ross flag story emerged from her grandson's account nearly a century after the supposed event, with no contemporary evidence supporting the claim. While Ross was indeed a skilled flag maker who produced banners for the Continental Army, the Stars and Stripes design evolved through congressional committee work and multiple seamstresses' contributions. The soft whisper of scissors through fabric, the quiet satisfaction of precise stitching, the warm pride of craftspeople supporting revolutionary ideals. Her actual contributions to the war effort were significant, just different from the singular moment of inspiration that captured popular imagination. What collaborative efforts in your community get remembered as individual achievements? You're sitting in dusty arena bleachers where spotlights dance across sawdust, and the gentle thunder of horse hooves carries tales of a frontiersman who became his own mythmaker. William Buffalo Bill Cody exaggerated most of his frontier exploits for his Wild West shows. While he did work as a buffalo hunter and army scout, many of his famous adventures were theatrical inventions designed to entertain Eastern audiences hungry for frontier drama. The soft jingle of spurs on wooden platforms, the gentle whoosh of lassos spinning through arena air, the quiet transformation of practical skills into spectacular entertainment. Cody understood that Americans wanted their frontier heroes larger than life, so he gave them exactly what they craved. His shows shaped how the world imagined the American West. What aspects of your own past have you emphasized or downplayed depending on your audience? You're walking forest trails where leaves crunch softly underfoot, and the gentle rustle of branches overhead whispers truths about a woodsman whose image was created by later marketers and mythmakers. Boone never wore the iconic coonskin cap associated with his image. He preferred felt hats and considered coonskin caps uncivilized. This detail was added by artists and later by Disney's Davy Crockett series, which confused the two frontiersmen. The soft snap of twigs under careful footsteps, the quiet observation skills needed for wilderness survival, the gentle confidence of someone truly at home in nature. Boone was an excellent woodsman and explorer, but his popular image combined elements from multiple frontier figures to create a more marketable character. What stereotypical images of your profession or background don't match your actual experience? You're in an Ohio apple orchard where blossoms drift gently on spring breezes, and the soft buzz of pollinating bees reveals the practical business sense behind America's most beloved folk hero. Chapman planted apple trees primarily to establish legal land claims and create profitable nursery businesses, not out of pure altruism. Under frontier law, planting 50 apple trees could help secure land ownership. His apples were mainly used for hard cider production, Alcohol was safer than water and highly profitable. The gentle whisper of wind through apple branches, the quiet satisfaction of long-term agricultural planning, the soft rustle of business ledgers recording transactions. Chapman was a shrewd entrepreneur who understood that frontier communities needed alcohol more than fresh fruit. His business model just happened to benefit everyone. What practical motivations behind your charitable acts might surprise people who see only the generous results? You're standing on a dusty frontier street where tumbleweeds roll lazily past wooden storefronts, and the gentle creak of saloon doors carries tales of a lawman whose reputation grew faster than his actual shooting skills. James Butler Wild Bill Hickok's gunfighting prowess was largely exaggerated by dime novelists and his own storytelling. While he did kill several men, most were in face-to-face confrontations rather than quick-draw duels. The famous fastest gun image came from fictional accounts written for Eastern audiences. The soft jingle of spurs on wooden sidewalks, the quiet tension of frontier justice, the gentle reality that most conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than gunfire. Hickok was more effective as a peace officer through reputation and diplomacy than through superior marksmanship. What skills are you known for that might be more about reputation than actual ability? You're at a traveling circus where sawdust sparkles in afternoon sunlight, and the gentle applause of amazed audiences mingles with truths about theatrical showmanship versus real marksmanship skills. While Annie Oakley was genuinely skilled with firearms, many of her most famous trick shots were carefully staged illusions using breakaway props and strategic positioning. The cigarette shooting trick, for instance, used specially prepared cigarettes that would break apart from the concussion of a nearby shot rather than being actually hit. The soft crack of rifles in outdoor arenas, the quiet precision required for legitimate marksmanship, the gentle artistry of creating wonder through skillful performance. Oakley was both a real shooter and a theatrical entertainer who understood that audiences wanted magic more than mere accuracy. What skills in your life involve more showmanship and presentation than people realize? Hey friends, if you're enjoying these gentle revelations about history's most endearing misconceptions, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that help you drift peacefully into sleep while discovering fascinating truths. You're in a candlelit medieval study where parchment crackles softly under flickering flames, and the gentle scratch of quill on paper reveals how ambiguous verses became prophecies through centuries of creative interpretation. Michel de Nostradame wrote intentionally cryptic quatrains that could be interpreted to fit almost any future event. His predictions were written in a mixture of French, Latin, and invented words, making them so vague that believers could find meaning in virtually anything. The soft whisper of turning pages, the quiet concentration of scholars seeking patterns in randomness, the gentle persistence of hope that someone knows what's coming next. Most famous fulfilled prophecies were only recognized as such after events occurred, when hindsight made connections that weren't obvious beforehand. Sometimes we need to believe someone can see the future, even when they're just writing puzzling poetry. What patterns do you find in your own life that might be coincidence rather than destiny? You're walking through a colorful circus tent where sawdust sparkles in afternoon light, and the gentle murmur of amazed crowds mingles with truths about America's most misquoted entertainer. Barnum never spoke his most famous phrase. It was actually said by a competitor trying to discredit him. Barnum believed in giving audiences genuine value for their money and built his reputation on delivering spectacular entertainment, not cheating customers. The soft rustle of circus programs, the quiet pride of showmanship done well, the gentle satisfaction of creating wonder that people gladly paid to experience. He wrote extensively about honest business practices and treating customers fairly. The irony is that this misattributed quote makes him seem dishonest when he was actually quite ethical by the standards of his era. What quotes attributed to you might completely misrepresent your actual beliefs or character? You're in an early 1900s kitchen, where steam rises gently from boiling pots, and the soft clatter of cooking utensils carries the story of a woman who became history's most feared but misunderstood disease carrier. Mary Mallon didn't understand germ theory and genuinely believed she was healthy since she showed no symptoms of typhoid. When health officials told her she was carrying deadly bacteria, it contradicted everything she knew about illness. The gentle sizzle of food in iron pans, the quiet routine of meal preparation, the soft confusion of someone whose reality suddenly made no sense. She continued cooking not from malice but from disbelief. How could she be sick when she felt perfectly fine? Modern understanding of asymptomatic carriers didn't exist in public consciousness, making her situation tragic rather than villainous. What scientific knowledge do you take for granted that would seem impossible to people from earlier eras? You're walking through opulent Russian palace halls where silk wallpaper gleams in candlelight, and the gentle echo of footsteps on marble floors carries tales of a powerful woman whose death was sensationalized by political enemies. Catherine II died of a stroke in her bedroom, not from any embarrassing bathroom incident involving a horse. This vulgar myth was spread by French revolutionaries who wanted to discredit monarchy by making royal deaths seem ridiculous and undignified. The soft rustle of imperial robes, the quiet dignity of a ruler who expanded Russian territory and culture, the gentle tragedy of reputation destroyed by crude political propaganda. She was actually one of history's most accomplished monarchs, corresponding with Enlightenment philosophers and establishing legal reforms that lasted for centuries. How might your own legacy be distorted by people who want to diminish your achievements? You're standing in an ancient Roman arena where sand shifts softly underfoot, and the gentle murmur of distant crowds whispers truths about a rebel whose motivations were more practical than philosophical. Spartacus led a slave revolt primarily to escape Italy and return to his homeland of Thrace, not to abolish slavery throughout the Roman Empire. His rebellion grew from a prison break into a massive army, but his goal was personal freedom, not universal liberation. The soft scrape of sandals on stone, the quiet desperation of men seeking home rather than revolution, the gentle reality that most historical uprisings had practical rather than idealistic motivations. Modern interpretations have transformed him into a freedom fighter for all humanity, when he was actually trying to get his followers back to their various homelands. What movements in your time might be remembered differently than their original intentions? You're in a medieval French village where church bells chime softly across rolling fields, and the gentle lowing of cattle mingles with revelations about a young woman whose social status was elevated by later storytellers. Jeanne d'Arc came from a relatively prosperous farming family that owned land and paid taxes directly to the crown, making them more like small landowners than peasants. Her father was a village official who could afford to give her a decent education for the time. The soft rustle of wool dresses, the quiet confidence that comes from comfortable circumstances, the gentle privilege of literacy in an age when most people couldn't read. The simple peasant girl narrative made her story more dramatic and inspiring, but it wasn't accurate. She had the social connections and education that helped her gain access to the French court. What aspects of your background might be simplified or changed to make your story more appealing to others? You're walking through autumn forests where leaves crunch softly underfoot, and the gentle rustle of branches overhead carries the complex story of a man whose final betrayal overshadowed years of genuine service. Arnold was one of America's most effective generals before his defection, winning crucial battles at Ticonderoga and Saratoga that helped secure French alliance. His treason came only after he felt repeatedly betrayed by Congress, which denied him promotions and questioned his expenses while he spent his own money supporting the war effort. The soft whisper of wind through Revolutionary War battlefields, the quiet bitterness of unrecognized sacrifice, the gentle tragedy of good intentions soured by political disappointment. His name became synonymous with betrayal, but for most of the war he was fighting harder for American independence than many officers who remained loyal. What good deeds in your life might be overshadowed if you made one major mistake? You're in ancient Rome, where marble columns cast gentle shadows, and the soft splash of fountain water carries tales of imperial madness that were likely exaggerated by hostile historians writing decades after the fact. The story of Caligula appointing his horse Incitatus as consul was probably satirical exaggeration by later writers who wanted to emphasize his alleged insanity. Contemporary accounts suggest he pampered the horse to mock the Senate, implying that his horse was as qualified as the senators, but there's no evidence of actual appointment. The gentle clip-clop of hooves on Roman stones, the quiet dignity of animals treated with unusual respect, the soft irony that caring too much about a horse became evidence of madness. Political enemies after his death transformed eccentric behavior into stories of complete insanity. What unusual habits or preferences of yours might be misinterpreted as evidence of instability? You're riding dusty Missouri trails where prairie grass waves gently in afternoon breeze, and the soft thunder of horse hooves carries truths about a bank robber whose crimes were romanticized by dime novelists and later Hollywood. James and his gang robbed banks and trains for personal profit, not to help the poor. The Robin Hood image was created by sympathetic journalists and fiction writers who wanted to make Confederate veterans seem heroic rather than criminal. The gentle jingle of stolen coins, the quiet desperation of men who couldn't adjust to post-war life, the soft tragedy of violence mistaken for noble resistance. James never gave money to poor farmers. He kept it for himself and his gang. The romanticized outlaw image served political purposes for people who wanted to justify continued resistance to Reconstruction. What criminals in modern times might be remembered as heroes by future generations who don't understand the full context? You're in a Victorian parlor, where lace curtains filter gentle sunlight, and the soft tick of a mantelpiece clock measures time in a house where sensational journalism created guilt from mere suspicion. Lizzie Borden was acquitted by a jury that heard all the evidence, but newspaper coverage had already convicted her in public opinion. The famous rhyme, "Lizzie Borden took an axe," was created by journalists to sell papers, not to report facts. The gentle rustle of newspaper pages, the quiet dignity of someone maintaining innocence despite public condemnation, the soft injustice of trial by media rather than law. Physical evidence didn't support the charges, and alternative suspects existed, but the story of a daughter killing her parents was too compelling for the press to abandon. Sometimes being accused is enough to create permanent guilt in popular memory. What accusations in your community might persist long after the evidence proves them false? You're sitting beside a gentle prairie stream where tall grass sways softly in evening breeze, and the quiet rustle of wind carries truths about a leader whose role was spiritual rather than military. While Sitting Bull was the spiritual leader who united the tribes at Little Bighorn, he spent most of the actual battle making medicine and protecting the village rather than fighting Custer's forces. Crazy Horse and other war chiefs led the combat while Sitting Bull ensured the safety of women, children, and elders. The soft whisper of sacred sage burning, the gentle rhythm of prayer songs, the quiet strength of leadership that prioritizes protection over glory. Later accounts often portrayed him as the military mastermind, but his actual contribution was providing the spiritual unity that made victory possible. Sometimes the most important leadership happens away from the front lines. What behind-the-scenes leadership in your community goes unrecognized because it's not dramatic or visible? You're floating down the Nile where papyrus reeds whisper against boat hulls, and the gentle lap of ancient waters carries tales of royal theater that never actually happened as described. The famous story of Cleopatra being smuggled to Julius Caesar, rolled inside a carpet, comes from much later Roman accounts written for dramatic effect. Contemporary sources suggest she was wrapped in a linen sheet or blanket, much more practical for breathing and movement. The soft rustle of fine Egyptian linen, the quiet intelligence required for successful political theater, the gentle pragmatism of a queen who understood presentation but wasn't foolish about execution. Cleopatra was brilliant at staging memorable encounters, but she was too smart to risk suffocation for mere dramatic flair. Sometimes the practical version of events is less romantic but more believable. What dramatic stories about your own life have grown more elaborate in the retelling? You're walking through Tennessee forests where leaves crunch softly underfoot, and the gentle snap of twigs tells stories of a real pioneer whose legend outgrew his already impressive reality. David Crockett never claimed to have killed a bear at age 3. This tall tale came from campaign publicity when he ran for Congress. He was indeed an excellent hunter and frontiersman, but his political opponents and supporters both exaggerated his backwoods exploits for different reasons. The soft padding of moccasins on forest trails, the quiet patience required for successful hunting, the gentle humor of a man who enjoyed his own growing mythology. Crockett actually embraced many of the exaggerations because they helped his political career, becoming a willing participant in creating his own legend. Sometimes we become the characters others want us to be. What aspects of your personality have you emphasized because others seem to expect them from you? You're driving dusty Depression-era roads where heat shimmers gently above asphalt, and the soft rumble of vintage engines carries truths about outlaws whose crimes were smaller than their headlines suggested. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow robbed mostly small businesses, gas stations, and rural stores, not major banks. Their total career haul was probably less than modern bank robbers steal in single heists. The gentle ping of gas pumps, the quiet desperation of small-time crime during economic collapse, the soft tragedy of young people choosing violence over poverty. Newspapers sensationalized their exploits because readers needed romantic outlaws during the Depression's hardship. They became folk heroes not because their crimes were impressive, but because people wanted to believe someone was successfully fighting the system. What rebellions in your time might be remembered as more significant than they actually were? You're in a 1920s Chicago speakeasy, where jazz music drifts softly through cigarette smoke, and the gentle clink of hidden bottles reveals that even tough guys have embarrassing origin stories. Capone's famous facial scars came from a woman who slashed him during a bar fight in his youth, not from rival gangsters or war wounds as he often claimed. He was working as a bouncer when he insulted a woman whose brother responded with a razor. The soft shuffle of dance shoes on hidden club floors, the quiet pride that transforms embarrassing moments into warrior myths, the gentle irony that reputation often requires better stories than truth provides. Capone preferred people think his scars came from gang warfare, rather than admitting he'd been schooled by an angry family member protecting their sister's honor. What embarrassing moments in your past have you transformed into more flattering stories? You're standing in an ancient valley where olive trees cast dappled shadows, and the gentle breeze carries archaeological truths about a biblical figure whose size was inflated by translation and time. Ancient Hebrew measurements suggest Goliath was probably around 6'9" plus, rather than the 9+ feet tall that later translations claimed. While impressive for his era, this would make him tall rather than impossibly gigantic. The soft rustle of shepherds' robes, the quiet confidence of faith overcoming fear, the gentle reminder that courage doesn't require facing the impossible, just the intimidating. Different ancient manuscripts give varying heights, and copying errors over centuries likely increased his measurements. David's victory was still remarkable without requiring his opponent to be literally superhuman. What challenges in your life seem more manageable when you look at them with accurate rather than exaggerated perspective? You're standing outside a Kansas saloon where morning light streams through broken windows, and the gentle sound of sweeping glass reveals the method behind what seemed like madness. Carrie Nation's saloon-smashing campaign was carefully calculated political theater, not random violence. She deliberately targeted illegal establishments that were violating Kansas prohibition laws but weren't being prosecuted. The soft crunch of broken bottles, the quiet strategy of someone who understood that dramatic action gets attention for serious causes, the gentle precision of activism disguised as chaos. Nation was an educated woman who used her crazy lady persona to protect herself legally. Authorities were reluctant to prosecute someone they could dismiss as mentally unstable. Her apparent madness was actually quite shrewd political calculation. What seemingly irrational behavior around you might actually be carefully planned strategy. You're riding through New Mexico desert, where sagebrush whispers in hot wind, and the gentle jingle of spurs tells stories of an outlaw whose mirror image confused history for over a century. Billy the Kid appeared left-handed only because his most famous photograph was a tintype, which creates mirror images. He was actually right-handed, but this wasn't discovered until the 1980s when historians realized all tintypes reverse the image. The soft leather creak of saddles, the quiet loneliness of frontier outlaws, the gentle irony that technology can create false facts that persist for generations. This seemingly minor detail affected how people imagined him for decades, making him seem more unique and mysterious than he actually was. What false impressions about you might come from photos, social media, or other representations that don't show the complete picture? You're in an elegant Parisian theater where velvet curtains frame empty stages, and the soft whisper of silk scarves carries the truth about a Dutch woman who reinvented herself as an Eastern mystery. Margaretha Geertruida Zell was born in the Netherlands and learned her exotic Eastern dances from books and her imagination, not from actual training in Java or India. Her entire mysterious persona was theatrical invention designed to distinguish her from other European performers. The gentle rustle of costume jewelry, the quiet creativity required to transform mundane origins into magical performance, the soft success of someone who understood that audiences wanted fantasy more than authenticity. She became one of Paris's most celebrated dancers by giving people the exotic otherness they craved, regardless of its accuracy. What aspects of your public persona are more about giving people what they expect than reflecting your actual background? You're walking through the gardens of Versailles where fountains splash gently in afternoon light, and the soft crunch of gravel paths carries whispers about imperial bloodlines that weren't quite what they claimed to be. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was likely Napoleon's nephew, but there were persistent questions about his paternity that he never definitively resolved. His mother, Hortense de Beauharnais, had several affairs during her marriage, and some historians believe his biological father might have been a Dutch admiral rather than Napoleon's brother Louis. The gentle clip of royal carriages on cobblestone, the quiet uncertainty that shadows even imperial lineages, the soft diplomacy required when your legitimacy depends on bloodlines that might be fiction. He ruled effectively regardless of his parentage, but his entire claim to power rested on a family connection that remained questionable. What family stories that define your identity might be less certain than you've always believed? Hey friends, if you're finding comfort in these gentle revelations about history's most enduring misconceptions, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that guide you peacefully towards sleep while uncovering fascinating truths. You're in a dim Baltimore study where candlelight flickers across manuscript pages, and the gentle scratch of quill on paper reveals how a rival's obituary created a century of false reputation. Rufus Griswold, Poe's literary enemy, wrote a slanderous obituary immediately after Poe's death, claiming he was a drug-addicted alcoholic. Medical evidence suggests Poe died from brain inflammation, possibly from a tumor, and he was actually quite temperate with alcohol due to an unusual sensitivity. The soft whisper of turning pages, the quiet dignity of genius misunderstood by contemporaries, the the gentle tragedy of reputation destroyed by a single vindictive account. Griswold became Poe's literary executor and continued spreading lies in biographical sketches. Sometimes our enemies' words outlive the truth about who we really were. What false impressions about you might persist if someone who disliked you wrote your obituary? You're riding mountain trails where thin air carries the echo of hoofbeats, and the gentle wind through rocky passes whispers secrets about an outlaw whose death might have been greatly exaggerated. Robert Leroy Parker, known as Butch Cassidy, likely escaped the shootout in Bolivia and returned to the United States under a new identity. Family members reported visits from him decades after his supposed death, and Bolivian records of the incident are inconsistent. The soft jingle of silver conchos on leather gear, the quiet satisfaction of a successful escape, the gentle possibility that sometimes the good guys get away. Unlike his violent partner Sundance Kid, Cassidy was known for avoiding bloodshed and treating people decently. His reputation for fairness might have helped him find friends willing to keep his survival secret. What endings in your life might actually be new beginnings that others don't recognize? You're walking through Romanian forests where moonlight filters through ancient branches, and the soft rustle of leaves carries truths about a medieval ruler whose connection to vampires was pure Victorian invention. Bram Stoker borrowed only the name Dracula from Vlad Tepes and knew little about the historical prince. Stoker's vampire was inspired by Irish folklore, Gothic literature, and contemporary fears about foreign influence, not Romanian history. The gentle hoot of owls in midnight forests, the quiet separation between historical fact and literary creation, the soft irony that Vlad's actual brutality was less interesting to readers than fictional supernatural evil. Vlad was indeed violent, but his methods were typical for medieval warfare, not uniquely monstrous. Sometimes fictional characters become more famous than the real people whose names they borrowed. What aspects of your personality might be overshadowed if someone created a fictional character with your name? You're walking wilderness trails where streams babble gently over smooth stones, and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot carries questions about an explorer whose death remains mysteriously controversial. Lewis died from gunshot wounds at a remote Tennessee inn, but evidence suggests murder rather than suicide. He was carrying valuable documents and money, had been behaving normally, and showed no signs of depression to recent companions. The gentle whisper of wind through frontier forests, the quiet vulnerability of travelers in isolated places, the soft tragedy of unsolved mysteries that become accepted facts. The suicide ruling came from the innkeeper's testimony, but she had obvious motives to avoid a murder investigation. Sometimes the most convenient explanation becomes historical truth without sufficient evidence. What assumptions about tragic events in your community might be based more on convenience than investigation? You're sitting on a Mississippi porch where guitar strings vibrate softly in humid air, and the gentle rhythm of Delta blues carries truths about a musician whose talent was too remarkable for some people to believe came naturally. The Crossroads myth was created decades after Johnson's death by blues promoters who thought supernatural origin stories would sell more records. Johnson learned guitar through conventional practice and instruction from other musicians, including Ike Zimmerman, who taught him advanced techniques. The soft slide of fingers across guitar strings, the quiet dedication required to master complex musical skills, the gentle recognition that extraordinary talent often gets attributed to magic rather than hard work. Johnson's actual story, a young man practicing obsessively to perfect his craft, was less marketable than demonic intervention, so the myth replaced the reality. What achievements in your life have others attributed to luck or supernatural help, rather than recognizing your actual effort? You're in a frontier saloon where piano music drifts softly through cigarette smoke, and the gentle clink of whiskey glasses mingles with tales that grew taller with each telling and each drink. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, was indeed a frontierswoman who worked various jobs in the West, but most of her famous adventures were self-created publicity designed to sell her autobiography and lecture tours. She claimed relationships and exploits that were either completely false or greatly exaggerated. The soft thud of horse hooves on dusty trails, the quiet desperation of someone reinventing their life story for economic survival, the gentle tragedy of real accomplishments being overshadowed by fictional ones. Her actual frontier experience was remarkable enough without the embellishments, but truth didn't pay as well as sensational fiction. What stories about yourself have you embellished to make your life seem more interesting or dramatic? You're walking through industrial Cleveland, where factory smoke drifts gently across brick buildings, and the soft jingle of coins in pocket tells stories about generosity disguised as stinginess. Rockefeller's habit of giving dimes to children wasn't miserliness. It was calculated kindness designed to teach the value of money and saving. He believed small gifts meant more when they came with lessons about financial responsibility. The gentle clink of coins changing hands, the quiet wisdom of teaching through example rather than lecture, the soft irony that apparent cheapness was actually thoughtful pedagogy. He gave away over half his fortune to charity, but his public image focused on the dimes rather than the millions. Sometimes our smallest gestures become more famous than our largest contributions. What small habits of yours might be misunderstood by people who don't know your larger motivations? You're in a 19th century Quaker meeting house where silence settles gently between spoken prayers, and the soft rustle of plain dress fabric carries the voice of a woman whose full radicalism was softened by later historians. Mott advocated not just for women's rights and abolition, but for complete social revolution, including economic equality, prison reform, and Native American rights. Later suffrage historians emphasized only her women's rights work to make her seem more palatable to mainstream audiences. The gentle power of quiet conviction, the soft strength of someone who saw all injustices as connected, the quiet courage required to challenge every social assumption of her era. She was far more revolutionary than the sanitized version that appears in most textbooks. Sometimes history remembers only the parts of our beliefs that later generations find comfortable. What aspects of your worldview might be downplayed by people who want to use you as an example for their more limited causes? You're in a frontier blacksmith shop where metal rings softly against anvil, and the gentle hiss of hot steel meeting water reveals how legendary weapons often have more ordinary origins than their famous names suggest. The large fighting knife associated with Jim Bowie was likely designed by his brother Resin or by a blacksmith following existing patterns for hunting knives. Jim made the knife famous through his fighting skills, but he didn't create the design that bears his name. The soft scrape of blade against leather sheath, the quiet craftsmanship of tools made for frontier survival, the gentle irony that fame often attaches to the user rather than the creator. The knife design evolved from practical hunting and butchering tools that were already common on the frontier. Sometimes innovation gets credited to whoever makes something famous rather than whoever made it first. What tools or ideas in your field are named after people who popularized them rather than those who actually invented them? You're in a frontier gambling hall where cards snap softly against felt tables, and the gentle shuffle of poker chips reveals that America's most famous gunfighter was actually more skilled with cards than weapons. James Butler Hickok made most of his living as a professional gambler, not as a lawman or gunfighter. His reputation with firearms was largely exaggerated by dime novelists who needed dramatic heroes for their stories. The soft whisper of cards being dealt, the quiet concentration required for successful gambling, the gentle reality that entertainment value often matters more than accuracy. Hickok was indeed involved in several shootouts, but he was more famous for his poker skills among people who actually knew him. His legendary gun speed was mostly fictional, created by writers who understood that readers preferred action heroes to card sharks. What skills are you actually best at versus the ones people assume define you based on your reputation. Hey friends, if you're finding peace in these gentle explorations of history's most persistent myths, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that help you drift toward restful sleep while uncovering fascinating truths about the past. You're standing on a Pacific Island runway where trade winds whisper through palm fronds, and the gentle hum of propeller engines carries truths about an aviator whose disappearance spawned 1,000 conspiracy theories. Earhart was attempting a routine circumnavigation flight, not conducting espionage for the U.S. government. Radio transmissions and fuel calculations show she simply ran out of gas over the Pacific after missing tiny Howland Island. The soft drone of aircraft engines over endless ocean, the quiet precision required for long-distance navigation, the gentle tragedy of mechanical limits overwhelming human determination. Conspiracy theories about spy missions emerged decades later to make her disappearance seem more mysterious than the simple but heartbreaking reality of fuel exhaustion over vast water. Sometimes the most mundane explanations are the hardest to accept for losses that feel too profound for ordinary causes. What simple explanations in your life do you resist because they don't match the dramatic stories you prefer? You're at a Wild West show where sawdust sparkles in afternoon sunlight, and the gentle applause of amazed audiences mingles with the complex political views of America's most famous female performer. Phoebe Ann Mosey, known as Annie Oakley, believed women deserved equal opportunities, but thought voting would corrupt their moral influence on society. She advocated for women's education, employment rights, and self-defense training while opposing suffrage because she felt politics was inherently degrading. The soft crack of rifles hitting distant targets, the quiet independence of someone who supported herself through skill rather than marriage, the gentle complexity of views that don't fit modern political categories. Her position reflected Victorian beliefs about separate spheres rather than opposition to women's capabilities. Sometimes historical figures hold combinations of beliefs that seem contradictory to later generations. What beliefs do you hold that might seem inconsistent to people from different time periods or political perspectives? You're walking through Egyptian desert sands where hot wind carries ancient secrets, and the soft whisper of archaeological brushes reveals how a minor ruler became history's most famous pharaoh. Tutankhamun ruled for only 9 years and died young without significant achievements. He became famous only because his tomb was the first royal burial found largely intact by modern archaeologists. The gentle scrape of tools on ancient stone, the quiet excitement of discovering treasures that had waited thousands of years in darkness, the soft irony that preservation creates fame more effectively than accomplishment. Contemporary Egyptians considered him a relatively unimportant pharaoh, whose reign was notable mainly for reversing religious changes made by his predecessor. His gold mask and treasures made him iconic in the 20th century, but he was nearly forgotten in his own time. What people or achievements in your community might become famous for reasons completely unrelated to their original importance? You're beside railroad tracks where steel rails gleam in afternoon heat, and the gentle rhythm of hammers on metal echoes with the collective struggles of countless workers whose stories merged into one powerful legend. The John Henry Ballad emerged from multiple accounts of different railroad workers who died building tunnels through Appalachian mountains. The story captured widespread anxiety about machines replacing human labor during the Industrial Revolution. The soft ringing of steel hammers, the quiet dignity of physical labor, the gentle truth that folk heroes often represent entire communities rather than individuals. Different versions of the song feature different locations and details, suggesting the tale grew from multiple similar incidents. Sometimes our most powerful stories are collective memories disguised as individual narratives. What legends in your community might actually represent the experiences of many people rather than one specific person? You're in colonial Philadelphia, where morning light streams through workshop windows, and the gentle rhythm of commercial activity reveals how history reduced a successful entrepreneur to a single patriotic moment. Elizabeth Griscom Ross operated a thriving upholstery business, made flags for the Continental Navy, and managed complex financial affairs as an independent businesswoman. The focus on one alleged flag overshadowed her actual accomplishments as a skilled craftswoman and entrepreneur. The soft whisper of fabric against wooden tables, the quiet competence of someone managing multiple aspects of colonial commerce, the gentle irony that reducing her to one patriotic story diminished rather than honored her real achievements. She represented the economic independence that many colonial women achieved through skilled trades, but this broader significance was lost in the flag mythology. What single moments or achievements might overshadow the fuller scope of your actual contributions and capabilities? You're walking through misty Romanian forests where moonlight filters through ancient trees, and the gentle rustle of leaves carries the separation between Gothic fiction and historical reality. Bram Stoker's Dracula borrowed only the name from Vlad Tepes and created a character based on Irish folklore, Victorian fears about immigration, and Gothic literary traditions rather than Romanian history. Stoker never visited Romania and knew little about Vlad beyond his nickname. The gentle hoot of owls in midnight woods, the quiet distinction between literary inspiration and historical research, the soft irony that fictional vampires became more famous than the real medieval prince whose name they borrowed. The novel reflected British anxieties about foreign influence in changing social structures, not Romanian culture or history. What fictional characters or stories have become more influential in shaping perceptions of your heritage than actual historical facts? You're riding across great plains where grass waves gently in prairie wind, and the soft thunder of cavalry hooves carries the complex story of African American soldiers who earned honor from both allies and enemies. Native American tribes gave the nickname Buffalo Soldiers to black cavalry regiments as a sign of respect for their fighting ability and courage, even though they were adversaries. The name honored the buffalo's significance in Plains culture, strength, endurance, and sacred importance. The gentle jingle of military equipment, the quiet recognition of honor transcending conflict, the soft irony that enemies could acknowledge each other's valor while still fighting. These regiments served with distinction in the Indian Wars despite facing racism from white officers and civilians. Sometimes respect develops between opponents who recognize similar qualities of courage and determination. What adversaries in your life have you come to respect even while disagreeing with them? You're driving dusty Depression-era roads where heat shimmers above cracked pavement, and the soft rumble of vintage engines carries truths about outlaws whose crimes were much smaller than their legendary status suggested. Clyde Barrow and his gang robbed mostly small businesses because banks had improved security and federal investigation resources that made them too dangerous to target regularly. Their total career haul was probably less than what modern embezzlers steal in single transactions. The gentle ping of gas pumps at rural stations, the quiet desperation of small-time crime during economic collapse, the soft reality that most outlaws were more pathetic than romantic. Newspapers exaggerated their exploits because readers during the Depression wanted to believe someone was successfully defying authority, even if the actual crimes were petty and local. What rebellions or resistance movements in your time might seem more significant to future generations than they actually are? You're riding through California hills, where oak trees cast dappled shadows, and the gentle whisper of wind through Spanish moss carries tales of a fictional hero who became more real than actual historical figures. Johnston McCulley created Zorro in 1919 as pure fiction, but the character became so associated with California history that many people believe he was based on a real person. No masked vigilantes operated in Spanish or Mexican California, and the political situations in McCulley's stories were largely invented for dramatic effect. The soft clip of horse hooves on mountain trails, the quiet romance of imagined rebellion against oppression, the gentle power of fiction to create historical memories that never actually happened. Zorro represents what people wanted California's past to be rather than what it actually was, a romanticized version that's more appealing than complex historical reality. What fictional stories about your region's history have become more popular than the actual historical events? You're standing beside railroad tracks where steam hisses gently from locomotive engines, and the soft rhythm of wheels on steel carries the fuller story of a disaster that created one hero while forgetting others. John Luther Casey Jones did stay with his locomotive during the fatal collision, but his fireman Sim Webb also played a heroic role by jumping from the engine and running back to warn the following passenger train. Webb's quick action prevented a much larger disaster, but the ballad focused only on Jones. The gentle chuff of steam engines, the quiet teamwork required for safe railroad operation, the soft injustice of remembering only one person from a story that involved multiple acts of courage. Railroad work was inherently collaborative, but folk songs prefer individual heroes to complex stories about professional partnerships. What teamwork in your workplace or community might be remembered as individual achievement if someone wrote a song about it? You're aboard a luxury liner where ocean waves lap gently against steel hulls, and the soft murmur of evening conversations carries the truth about a woman whose nickname was created by reporters, not herself. Margaret Brown earned her reputation for heroism during the Titanic disaster by helping other passengers into lifeboats and later advocating for survivors' rights. But she never used the nickname Unsinkable Molly. Newspapers created this catchy phrase years later to sell stories about the disaster. The gentle creak of ship timbers, the quiet dignity of someone who helped others without seeking glory, the soft irony that her actual heroism was overshadowed by a fictional persona designed for entertainment. She was indeed brave and outspoken, but the flamboyant character from later musicals and movies bore little resemblance to the real woman who simply did what needed doing during a crisis. What nicknames or labels have others given you that don't match how you see yourself? You're in a St. Petersburg palace, where candles flicker in ornate holders, and the gentle rustle of velvet curtains whispers truths about a controversial figure whose death was dramatized beyond recognition. Grigory Rasputin died from a single gunshot wound to the head, not from the elaborate sequence of poisoning, beating, and drowning described by his assassin Prince Yusupov. The dramatic death story was likely invented to make the murder seem more justified. If Rasputin was supernaturally evil, then extraordinary measures were needed to stop him. The soft shuffle of court intrigue, the quiet desperation of people seeking miraculous cures for royal illness, the gentle tragedy of someone becoming a scapegoat for political failures beyond their control. Rasputin was controversial but human, not the demonic figure that required multiple murder attempts to eliminate. What stories about overcoming difficult people in your life have grown more dramatic in the retelling? You're walking dusty frontier streets where spittoons ring softly with tobacco juice, and the gentle shuffle of playing cards reveals that America's most famous lawman was primarily a professional gambler who occasionally worked in law enforcement. Earp made most of his living running gambling operations and saloons rather than serving as a peace officer. His law enforcement career was sporadic and often motivated by business interests rather than justice. The soft click of poker chips, the quiet calculation required for successful gambling enterprises, the gentle reality that frontier heroes were usually entrepreneurs first and lawmen second. Even the famous gunfight at the OK Corral was more about business disputes than heroic law enforcement. Earp understood that his reputation as a tough lawman was good for his gambling business, so he cultivated the image while focusing on more profitable activities. What aspects of your professional reputation might emphasize your most dramatic moments rather than your daily reality? You're in an early 1900s kitchen where steam rises from boiling pots, and the gentle sizzle of cooking food carries the tragedy of someone who became a public enemy for spreading disease she couldn't see or understand. Mary Mallon genuinely believed she was healthy because she showed no symptoms of typhoid fever. When health officials told her she was carrying deadly bacteria, it contradicted everything she knew about illness and made no scientific sense to her. The gentle clatter of cooking utensils, the quiet routine of meal preparation for wealthy families, the soft confusion of someone whose entire reality was suddenly overturned by invisible threats. She continued cooking not from malice but from disbelief. Asymptomatic carriers were a new concept that even doctors barely understood. Her resistance to quarantine reflected human nature's difficulty accepting threats we cannot perceive. What invisible dangers in your environment might you be unconsciously dismissing because they don't match your experience? You're at a traveling Wild West show where rifle shots echo across outdoor arenas, and the gentle applause of fascinated audiences mingles with the voice of someone using entertainment to promote serious social change. Phoebe Ann Mosey, known as Annie Oakley, used her fame to advocate for women's education and self-defense training. She offered to train a regiment of women sharpshooters for the Spanish-American War and regularly spoke about women's need to protect themselves. The soft crack of perfectly aimed rifles, the quiet confidence that comes from genuine skill, the gentle revolution of someone proving women's capabilities through undeniable performance rather than political argument. Her shooting exhibitions were entertainment, but they were also powerful demonstrations that women could master traditionally male skills when given proper training and opportunity. What talents or skills do you have that could be used to advocate for causes you believe in? You're walking mountain trails where pine needles cushion each footstep, and the gentle murmur of wilderness streams carries acknowledgement of the many indigenous people whose knowledge made the famous expedition possible. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark's success depended on Native American guides, interpreters, and hosts throughout their journey. Sacagawea was just one of many indigenous people who provided crucial assistance, but history often portrays the expedition as two white men conquering unknown territory alone. The soft whisper of wind through unmarked trails, the quiet generosity of communities sharing food and shelter with strangers, the gentle truth that exploration usually means following paths that local people already know. The expedition's maps were largely based on information provided by Native Americans who had been traveling these routes for generations. What achievements in your life have depended on help from people who might not receive equal credit? You're walking through an Ohio orchard where apple blossoms drift softly on spring breeze, and the gentle hum of bees tells the practical story behind America's most beloved folk hero's business model. Johnny Appleseed was a shrewd entrepreneur who understood frontier economics as well as horticulture. His apple orchards helped him claim land under frontier settlement laws, while providing communities with a valuable commodity for making cider, safer to drink than water and highly profitable. The gentle rustle of leaves in carefully planned groves, the quiet satisfaction of long-term agricultural investment, the soft wisdom of someone who found profit in providing what people actually needed. Chapman's environmental consciousness and business sense weren't contradictory. They were perfectly aligned strategies for frontier success. What activities in your life serve multiple purposes that others might not recognize? You're sitting in a 1930s auto camp where dust settles gently on parked cars, and the soft scratch of pencil on paper reveals that one of America's most notorious criminals was also documenting her own downfall through verse. Bonnie Parker wrote and published poems about her criminal career, including The Story of Bonnie and Clyde, which predicted their violent end. She understood they were doomed, but seemed unable to stop the cycle of crime and violence that had trapped them. The gentle rustle of newspaper pages carrying her published poetry, the quiet desperation of someone narrating their own tragedy, the soft irony that artistic expression continued even in a life dedicated to destruction. Her poems showed more self-awareness and regret than the gleeful criminals portrayed in later movies. What creative expressions in your life reveal truths about yourself that you don't often speak aloud? You're riding across Texas plains where tall grass waves in endless wind, and the gentle thunder of imaginary hoofbeats carries tales of a folk hero who was invented for children's entertainment, not frontier history. Edward O'Reilly created Pecos Bill in 1917 for a children's magazine. But the character became so popular that many people assumed he was based on real frontier legends. No authentic cowboy folklore featured this character before O'Reilly's stories appeared in print. The soft whisper of wind across open range, the quiet power of storytelling to create cultural memory, the gentle process by which fiction becomes accepted as historical tradition. Pecos Bill represents what people wanted the frontier to be rather than what it actually was. A place where human beings could be as vast and untamed as the landscape itself. What fictional characters or stories from your childhood have shaped your understanding of history more than actual historical events? You're listening to a 1930s radio program where static crackles softly between dramatic scenes, and the gentle gallop of hoofbeats carries the final story in our journey, about a character who never existed but embodied every hope for perfect justice in an imperfect world. The Lone Ranger was created by radio writers who wanted to give Depression-era audiences a hero who always did the right thing without expecting reward or recognition. He represented the fantasy that somewhere, someone was fighting injustice purely for moral reasons rather than personal gain. The soft thunder of Silver's hooves, the quiet dignity of masked justice that asks for nothing in return. The gentle dream that good can triumph without becoming corrupted by power or politics. The character became more real to many Americans than actual historical figures, because he fulfilled emotional needs that complex, flawed humans cannot satisfy. As we end our gentle journey through history's beautiful lies, what stories do you tell yourself about the world that might be more about hope than truth? And so, dear friends, we reach the end of our peaceful exploration through 100 stories of history's most persistent and beautiful misconceptions. Each tale has reminded us that human beings have always needed stories that comfort, inspire, and make sense of a complex world, even when those stories drift far from literal truth. As you settle into sleep tonight, remember that the lies we believe often reveal deeper truths about what we value, what we hope for, and what we need to believe about ourselves and our world. History isn't just what happened. It's what we remember, what we choose to preserve, and what we pass on to the next generation. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining us on this gentle journey through the tender myths that shape our understanding of the past. If these soothing revelations have helped you find peace tonight, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that help you drift peacefully towards sleep while learning something fascinating about the beautiful complexity of human memory and meaning-making. Rest well, knowing that truth and fiction dance together through time, creating the stories that help us make sense of being human in a mysterious and wonderful world.